Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, a past president of the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, which is our show sponsor. And with me today is another past president of the society, Jo Peterson. Jo has run away to New York. She lives in upstate New York in Henderson, and she is a member of the society there and also a trustee. And she's the owner of the Simple Living Genealogist. And welcome, Jo.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk about something that I find interesting. It is also a topic that has both good and sad times with it, and something, especially with DNA today, that one never knows when there may be a knock on the door or a letter or a phone call, and that is children that have been given up for adoption. So, Jo, you are going to be generous and share your story with us, I think, to get us started. So, because you are an adoptee.
I am. I grew up with my biological mother, but I grew up without my biological father. And so my mother kept from me, for her reasons, of not telling me. But I always knew my biological father was out there. I pushed and pushed to finally get a name. That was a question I asked a lot of my cousins or anyone that can give me a little tidbit of information. And then it wasn't until probably in my 20s, my grandmother provided me with a letter that actually had his full name and my grandfather's name and the address where they visited my grandfather to see if they could find out information about my biological father. And that gave me a huge clue on to begin researching. And it was early internet, and so I had written every person I could to see if I could find information. And so it was hard. Not like today where you can, easily find information, but it was actually about I want to say 6-7 years ago, and a friend of mine and I and a couple other friends, we were scrolling through Facebook, and all of a sudden my friend stopped me and said, "Wait, that looks like your son," like the spitting image of my oldest son. And long story short, I found out it was my brother, a half-brother.
Half-brother.
Messaged him on Facebook and was able to find my biological father. And since then, we've been able, we have DNA that have matched and everything. So, but that was upon finding him.
Yeah, it can be a difficult chore. I have a cousin, my father's second oldest brother, married his wife, and she had a daughter. The biological father, was in the military in World War II, and when he returned, he didn't return to my aunt and my cousin. Of course, she wasn't my cousin then, but when my uncle and my aunt married, he adopted my cousin. And when she was 12, they told her that he was her adopted father. And I don't know what all she knows, but I know I had a difficult time finding anything on him because all I knew was his last name was Jones.
A common name.
Do you want to know? And I didn't know what county in southern New Jersey. Would you like to know how many Jones families there were? Eventually, I actually fell into, by accident, the fact that I could get access to divorce records for New Jersey for the time. And I got the divorce file, and I got the information on him. So.
And every state is different on whether they'll even open the adoption cases.
Well, and New Jersey was a closed adoption until a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, they opened them, and they did a thing beforehand that birth parents could fill in applications to have the information remain restricted, but
Right.
but there were very few cases that were actually
Would
done
allow
like
it.
that, and so they are open today. But
Well,
I
I think
never thought I'd
DNA
see
is
it happen.
changing it.
Well, and DNA is
Because,
certainly,
I
yes.
mean, before it was closed because then they could protect that information, but now DNA is opening so many doors
Yeah.
that people
Yeah.
can just bypass them. So why not start opening some of those cases?
Yeah. So, what kind of information does somebody really need to know before they try to start searching?
I mean, I honestly tell anybody who is interested, no matter how little information you have, you can look. I mean, I've had cases where there's been minimal information, but if just knowing the ethnicity, the where they lived, where they may have gone to school, every little tidbit of information, even religion, can play a part in trying to figure out where. I mean, those are all little key points that people should take into account.
And of course, hopefully you live in a small town or a small area, which makes it even more, I was listening to the taping of another show that you did with Janelle, and, those small town areas. I grew up in a really small town in New Jersey, and basically everybody knew everybody when I was a kid. It's not that way today because the farms have all been sold, and so there's been a boom in stores and housing and all that kind of thing. But a small town, where I grew up, if you did something wrong, most of the time your parents knew before you got home to tell them. So that, I'm sure, is quite helpful. So,
Well, and even if you see them like missing for a year from school, like a young girl getting pregnant, they're going to send her away, especially in those small towns.
Yes. So what advice do you have for people who may be seeking information on a birth family?
Never expect it's going to be as simple. Yes, DNA has sped it up, but never, ever, it could be quick. It could be like me, that it could take years. And I mean, that was even years after we had internet technology. And so just don't go in thinking, I'm going to get this solved within, 2 weeks. Also, just don't give up is a big one. And every piece of information, I tell everybody, put everything down. Every little piece every person you've talked to, any little tidbit of information you get from family could be a clue, but it also could be misguided information.
Yes.
Or it could be misremembered information.
Yeah, misguided in that they're trying to steer you away from, or memories are not.
Memories,
always, particularly when you're dealing with older people.
Exactly.
And what they do and don't remember.
Yeah.
And I had a case, I was interviewing my mother's oldest sister, and I had interviewed her a lot of times. And one day my favorite time was Thanksgiving weekend. She lived down near Ocean City, New Jersey, and we'd go over to Ocean City and have lunch and walk the boardwalk. And we came back and we were talking, and finally it was dinner time. She went out to fix us something. She lived in an apartment, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, she said, "Well, have you found anything about my Aunt Mary's illegitimate child?" And I'm like, where did this come from? Well, she had overheard as a kid the adult women talking, and I thought, there's probably not a snowball's chance that I'm going to find anything. The child definitely was not in the picture, and of course, New Jersey adoptions being if the child was adopted. But lo and behold, I went home and went through some stuff that came from my grandparents' house, and there were a couple of letters she wrote to her parents because she was working in Atlantic City and they were living in Summers Point down near Ocean City, New Jersey, so she couldn't travel back and forth daily. And there were a couple of letters that verified that she was working in this 5 and 10. She was working nights. The assistant manager was there, and so now with open adoption stuff, I need to pursue that.
Yeah.
But I haven't. But I thought there's probably not a snowball's chance I'm going to find anything to verify this. But when I went home and started looking, I had forgotten these 2 letters.
It's like, because secrets get buried so much.
Yes.
But
Yes.
they can come to light if you just look. There's clues just right around the corner in that little box and in the back of the closet.
So, and of course, overall, what are kind of the picture of adoption laws across the country? Are
They're all just
these
so
more closed,
different.
or-
Things are opening a lot more. One thing I do tell people, and I believe I have the website up here, the National Adoption Registry is a worldwide website that people can go and actually record, because this is one of the first places I will go and look to see if adoptee parents or birth parents or adoptees or even siblings will register on here that they're looking for someone. And so I always tell anyone, before you hire anybody or do anything, go to this website, check it out, register. I had actually done it as well. So you're at least on there.
Yeah.
And so I definitely recommend doing that. And then also DNA is the big thing. And sometimes you will need help to shovel through, the hundreds and thousands of matches.
Yes, I have that with mine. I've got people that, in all the research I've done, I still haven't connected into some of the surnames that come up, particularly when you get into 6th and 7th and 8th cousins.
Right, yeah, you have to go all the way back and go back up.
As far as do parents or do biological parents register with this website?
So the biological
So that-
parents can,
that can be a
and half siblings
okay.
can also register.
Can be a big help.
Yeah.
So what happens after a relative is found? This can certainly change families' lives, I'm sure.
I definitely tell people you need to go in and don't go in expecting what's going to happen. You could either have an instant connection, or depending on the circumstances, it might be very traumatic for that person who maybe gave the child up because of rape or other circumstances. So you need to go in knowing you're going to at least get that person's name, and especially if you're into family history, you can at least have their name to go on to learn more about how you're connected. But just go in and see what happens. Be prepared that this might not be a welcoming situation. And so just be sensitive. I tell people, when you reach out, don't expect an immediate response. And also, if they don't respond right away, don't send them an email in the next week or so. Give them time. Sometimes they'll need to process before, and that might just be a trigger. And don't give all the information about everything. Just give a little tidbit. I normally start out with, I'm looking for an adoptee's biological parents. And so I have a DNA match and other information. Can we chat? Don't throw everything up there expecting that it's going to be like, okay, it's 100%,
Because even under other circumstances, we had a situation with my mother's father and his oldest brother. They had a disagreement in 1942 when their sister died. And so there was no communication between the two families. In fact, I didn't know until I got into genealogical research that when my grandfather died in 1973, his older brother was still living in Philadelphia, and he lived in southern New Jersey. The only one that I knew was still living was his youngest sister. And she certainly had never said anything. So, you know, there had been this divide, and it trickled on down. And so finally, I happened to be reading or looking at the funeral home website that my family used, and it was in the town where one of my mother's first cousins lived. Well, the first thing was when we went to make my parents, or pre-make my parents' funeral arrangements, and the funeral director finished with my father and asked my mother what her maiden name was, and she said Peyton, and she spelled it P-A-T-O-N. And he said, "Oh, are you any relation to Hugh Peyton that lives around the corner on such and such a street?" And of course, by then I knew that this was her cousin. And she said, "No," just like that. And I said, "What do you mean, Mother? He's your first cousin." And I got the dagger looks, but, you know, so I figured when we get home, I'm going to hear it. But we didn't, and I talked to my father, and my father said, "She has known for 20 years. I have tried to get her to get in touch with them." Wouldn't do it. So, of course, and this was after my mother passed away, I saw on the funeral home website that his wife had passed away. And she was 83 or 84, and I didn't know exactly how old he was. So I thought, if there's ever going to be a chance. So I wrote a letter. I didn't give him a phone number or anything, but I wrote a letter, and I included some copies of some pictures that I knew he would recognize the people in them. Sent it off on a Wednesday, and Friday night I was out, got home, and there was a phone call message on my answering machine. Well, he got the letter, he read it, and his daughter and son-in-law took him out for dinner every Friday night, so he's telling her about it.
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, when we get back to the house, let me see it." But he said, "You know, I don't know whether this is legitimate." Well, she read the letter, I explained who I was, and the pictures, she said, "Dad, that's Grandmom and Grandpop," and, you know. So we made the connection, and by the time I actually go up to visit him, his nephew had sent me a lot of information on that side of the family. So I visited with him probably 4 or 5 times, and his daughter worked in the grocery store where my sister shopped, so we got to meet and everything. And you know, similar kind of situation. It was just there was no adoption there.
Right.
But that kind of thing can happen with an adoption. So
Definitely.
So, you know, what are some of the other things, maybe an example you might have of?
Yeah, I've had a
worked
couple
on?
cases I've worked on. One was definitely ended up being a sensitive issue with at least part of it. It was actually the birth parents came to me, the birth mother, and asked for help to try to locate her adopted son's birth parents. Just because she felt it was important to know, you know, health-wise, his medical history. And so I was able to find both of them, and it ended up, and that was without adoption records, and I kind of used DNA to help shuffle through everything. And his birth parents, actually, it was a one-night thing back at college. A relationship never developed. He knew about the child, but by the time I had found him, he had already passed away.
Right.
But his current wife and the children knew about him. So that was a happy ending. On the other side, we did find the birth mother. She wanted no more contact. And I did explain, you know, because through my research, I learned she had a daughter. And I said, I just want you aware, because of DNA, if she ever does her DNA, she's going to have that connection.
Yeah. I knew somebody who through research, and of course, also through the family knew that this one uncle had a wife and a couple of children before he married into her family. And, you know, after the uncle passed away, she thought that they knew but had never said anything because it was no secret with the rest of the
Right.
family. And she quite innocently said something to one of her cousins, and that opened Pandora's box and was not initially well received, but
Right.
eventually they did come around and were understanding. But
Sometimes they just need that little time to process it, especially if they had no clue it was coming.
and they had no clue, and of course she really wasn't thinking. She said, I really wasn't thinking, but she said, I thought everybody knew because everybody else in the family knew, that it was just something they didn't talk about.
Right. Well, I mean, I had one case where the mother of had no clue who the actual father was. Because it was just, she was, I think, on vacation, out of town, had a one-night fling with a guy she met in a bar and never saw him again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even the mother had no clue of who the biological father was. Where, previous to the DNA, you would have never figured that out.
Yeah.
And now it's you're able to figure it out.
Yeah.
Just,
DNA has just been
all those sperm donors that have contributed to children in society.
You see stories about that. Other things. I'm wondering about children who GIs in various wars may have fathered with women in Europe or Vietnam or some of the other locations.
Yeah, because I mean they're slowly coming out and looking for their American connection.
Yeah.
And so you never know. If you were doing something over there, it's going to come back.
Yes.
And you're going to learn.
Yes.
And even China, with them when they had only one child policy, those baby girls would be left in the streets and picked up and put out for adoption. And a lot of those ended up coming here.
Yes.
And they had no connection to even start looking.
Yeah. I really think DNA has really opened up a lot for the positive or the negative, depending on the situation. My grandfather had his second youngest brother who ran away from home. And, I have personally searched with a little bit of knowledge that I had, but, I was hitting brick walls. I wasn't finding anything, and my mother's cousin's nephew up in Connecticut had his DNA done, and lo and behold, he had a match to a daughter of my grandfather's younger brother, and also they had a match back to my great-grandmother in family in Scotland today, and so I've had mine done, and it has confirmed I'm related too, but it's like, the story of he went into the military, changed his name, but he really didn't change much. He mainly changed his surname, gave his parents correct names and date of birth. The only thing he did a little bit on the paperwork when he went into World War I, he used the street that they had lived on when he left home, but a different 100 block. And, and the only thing really was he changed his name from Peyton to Pearson, and he was a career military officer and ended up, he was living or stationed near a number of places that family lived. Some of my mother's siblings moved to Florida, and he lived close to Fort Lauderdale at one time when they were down there in Florida. And he's buried up at Arlington, I found out. So I haven't ordered his service records yet. I need to do that. I have a friend that will go out and get them
get
for
the records.
me. But right now, last I talked to her, you still can't go in and go into the building. So.
Right.
So we got just a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else that you want to share with us?
Just DNA is ever growing. If you're adopted or searching for adoption, even the historical adoptions, orphan trains, those cases can now be solved. And so there's pretty much, it takes work. And hiring a genealogist like myself, they can work it through. They know the numbers to look for, how to connect it, going back in the history, and then moving forward.
And speaking of yourself and research, will you do anybody in?
Yes.
Do you
so
restrict the states or anything?
Nope, I do not restrict the states. I love challenges. So anyone can reach out to me at thessimplelivinggenealogist.com, and I'm willing to help out anyone to see.
And if anybody has problems connecting with Joe, just contact the society.
Yes.
And we can put the two of you together so that hopefully you'll be able to get some more clients. And,
and it's a close really matter to my heart.
Yeah, and really do some good work because there are some really fantastic stories that I have read in different articles and things. So
it gives you a lot of closure, and that's what people need.
Yeah, and that sometimes is all you really want to know. You really want to know. Like with my great uncle, I don't necessarily have a real need to connect with the family, but I wanted to know what happened to him.
The story.
And especially since I just hit total dead ends. There was nothing.
Yeah.
Of course, I had very little information, but my guess that he had changed his name was one of the things that I really thought was a factor, and that just, I figured he'd completely change it. But fortunately, he didn't. So, well, we really appreciate you coming down all the way from New York to be with us, and hopefully, when you said you're going to be living closer at some point,
eventually,
in a couple of years,
we'll
get to have you come more.
Definitely. I had a great time. Thank you.
So, okay. We'll let them roll the credits.
This was fun.
There we go. Yeah, it's like with my cousin. I didn't want to ask my aunt.
Yeah.
And I didn't know whether she knew